BQ fam, we're back. This is a fun one for me. I love talking to scholars. They make me feel stupid. So we got Tony Burke in the building. Holy crap. I think he's a PhD. I don't know. He's a very smart man. We're going to say that. And today's question is, what are the Apocrypha? This relates to the Bible, and it should be a good one. I hope you enjoy. Tony Burke, Better Questions. Thanks for being here, man. I'm really excited to get to know you, so I appreciate you spending the time with me today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for asking.
So I normally don't do this, but I'm going to tell you a little about me. I've been a Bible banger, if you will, traditional fundamentalist Christian for the last 13 years, and I've found the text to have way more deeper meaning than I've found in the church. And I've been leading these Bible studies, and I associate myself with the mystics now, and I don't know what that means, but like the Christians get really mad at me because I'm asking questions. And we were having a debate, a Bible study about I didn't even know they were called that, the Apocrypha, right? And I was like, I'm going to find somebody smarter than me to tell me about this. And here you are. You answered the call. So, gosh, man, I didn't do my homework because I wanted to come to you like a child. I wanted to come completely unknowingly. I've actually coincidentally, unrelated, just started reading the Gospel of Thomas with some of the dudes from Bible study, written by Leloup. And you're going to just overwhelm me today. But I guess if you don't mind, just kind of, for my audience, who's Tony Burke, you're very well studied. Just kind of take me from birth to today and how you got to this. Tell me the important things that you'd want strangers to know about you as you get ready to take us on a journey.
Okay. Well, I teach at York University in Toronto, Canada. And I started getting interested in apocryphal texts, which are loosely defined as stories about Jesus and his family and his followers that are not found in the New Testament. When I was an undergrad at university, I was in English literature, and I wanted some other things to kind of pad my university resume, I guess you could call it. So I decided to take a second major in religious studies after I took one course that I particularly liked. And the course that grabbed me was on apocalyptic literature. So Book of Revelation, Book of Daniel. And I was introduced to these other apocalyptic texts that are not found in the Bible. So Enoch, for example, or Baruch, or the Testaments of the 12 patriarchs. And I was raised Catholic, and I didn't know anything about these texts at all. And what it ended up doing for me was another thing about apocalyptic literature. I was very interested in it as a believer, and a little petrified of it, frankly, because I grew up during the Cold War, and was a little worried about what's going to happen with our world. And I found that just reading these texts, it kind of flattened the text out in a sense, and in that it took away some of the terror for me, because they just seemed to be these products of people trying to work through problems in their own time, where they felt persecuted and they felt that the world was ending for them, and they were not related to our own time. So it really started this idea of putting texts in their appropriate contexts. And from there, I took a New Testament class, and I got introduced to apocryphal Christian literature. And one text that really stood out for me was called The Infancy Gospel of Thomas. And these are stories about Jesus when he was a child, not found in the New Testament, running from the ages of 5 to 12. And I found it fascinating because here we had a couple of stories in here where Jesus was actually cursing people. So the one example is Jesus is walking through a marketplace, and another boy bumps into his shoulder, and Jesus curses him to death. He says, "You will no longer go your way," and the kid dies. So this is not a Jesus I was used to. And I got really interested in these texts and why they were not accepted in the Christian canon. And I followed that through my graduate work and published. My thesis was on the Gospel of Thomas, and that was published. And then I just started, interacting more with other scholars and working on other things. And one of the projects that I've worked on is called More New Testament Apocrypha. And the thrust of that series is that there are certain key apocryphal texts that was apocryphal or non-canonical is another way of calling it, that you find in the collections that you can buy at a bookstore. Things like the Gospel of Thomas, the Proto-Evangelium of James, and Gospel of Mary, and so on. But there's a whole bunch of other ones that hardly anyone knows anything about. There's about 400 or so Christian apocryphal texts, and most people only know about 30 of them, if they know any of them at all. And so this series is about publishing the texts that people aren't that much aware of. And then one other thing I'll mention that I'm connected to, we have a scholarly organization in North America called the North American Association for the Study of Christian Apocryphal Literature. It's something I co-founded. And this is just a way for scholars in North America to get together and work on projects together. And one of our projects is called the eClavis. And it's a free open access resource that lists all the Christian apocryphal texts known to us and gives you summaries of them and bibliographies and links to manuscripts. And I think it's a really good resource for your listeners as well to know about these texts in a free and easy way. So I'll stop there and I'll let you see what kind of questions you have.
Okay, so I guess really quick, so you came up Catholic and then in church as an English major. You just kind of happened, I don't remember, you happened upon a class and then you read the scriptures and then it made the story. You said it flattened the story, so it became an easier story to understand rather than a scarier one. Am I getting that right?
And I essentially stopped believing it. I stopped believing in the apocalyptic literature. That I stopped believing that the world was in, dire straits. Well, not that it wasn't, but it's got nothing to do with, God coming down from the sky and smiting everybody. And the more religious studies course I took, biblical as well as other religions, the more I just felt that, basically, the more I became an atheist, and that's where I am today. And I study the text now as a historian and a literary critic. And I generally feel more at peace with myself.
So, all right, this is the juice. I didn't know. So, so you would say because I would say like studying more text has brought me to a place of like questioning the fundamental tenets of the institution of the religion. I would say that it hasn't disproved, but only proven to me that God is far greater than anything that we worship. So, but you took it the other way to go as extreme to say that there is no all-knowing. There's no creator. We were a science accident, or am I embellishing? If that's insulting, I don't mean that to be at all.
No, not at all. But I hope this doesn't derail your discussion here.
Absolutely. I just want to be very clear. I've always wanted to talk to somebody that's devoutly atheist, because like in our world, we're like, oh, you believe in nothing. And I'm like, no, there's probably way more. So super curious. It doesn't derail it. It makes me really happy. Unfortunately, a lot of my Christian friends and audience are not going to listen to us, but that's okay. I'm thrilled about it.
Well, that's a thing. Like I think it's. I consider myself an atheist who's not an asshole. I'm not arrogant about it. It's just simply what my beliefs are. And when I have students come to me in class after teaching some things about the academic study of religion, and they say, "Wow, I don't believe this. I can't believe anymore." And I'm always like, no, don't go to that extreme. I think there are places that people can come to where you can reconcile these things. But it's just not, there's a spectrum of belief essentially of how much you want to put in your study of the Bible that comes from the divine and what comes from the human, right? So you can have biblical literalists or fundamentalists, and you can have someone who's very much in tune with the idea of the biblical text as symbolic and metaphorical in many ways. And you can exist anywhere along that spectrum. I'm on the far side of the spectrum of more symbolic, more metaphorical than more literal. And if students are starting from the literal, I don't want them to necessarily swing all the way over to where I am. But it's not so bad to swing somewhere along that spectrum that's a bit less on the literal side, because it's just simply not how these texts were written. That's part and parcel to how we teach in in the academy about how people in the ancient times were using metaphor, were using symbol, and that we sometimes misunderstand that.
Well, is there anybody that you would say, and I'll just say the question, and then if you need an explanation or a hypothetical, let me know. But is there anybody that has your type of resume, your type of experience that you know of that you would be interested, like your equal and opposite, somebody that has studied the Apocrypha, somebody that has studied the text and comes to a conclusion that God is real of some type, not that Christian, like, I feel like people like probably come to the study trying to affirming the Christian faith, but I'm suggesting that, like, do you know of anybody that studies the way that you do that has come to be of a belief in a divine creator of any type that is interesting for me to talk to? Because what I would love, not that I want to talk to you and then I want to talk to them, right? Because I'm only going to get one side of the story here, and I'm obsessed with your side of the story. I'm just curious who that avatar would be that you like might respect or consider your equal and opposite that believes in God after studying what you guys have studied. And or Tony, one of the other questions I have here is, like, generally speaking, I'm assuming those that read at depth come away with your conclusion, or is it a 50-50 split, or kind of what have you seen in your space that way?
Well, I was at a gathering of friends who are scholars in the town where I live some time ago. And I made some remark about how I don't know how you can, study this material as an academic and still have a belief in God. And I was surprised that everybody else in the room still had a belief in God. So it's not always apparent from our colleagues what their beliefs are. And when students ask us often in classes what they are, many of us are somewhat coy about it because we don't want the students to be, unduly affected by that, to feel like they're that if we do say that we're atheists, that we're going to be hostile to the text, or if they were hoping we were Christian but we're Jewish and they're going to get a Jewish perspective and they don't want that. The idea is in the academy that we're all treating this material objectively. So it's not always apparent what people's beliefs are. I have colleagues who are probably very similar to me in outlook, but I have some colleagues who still participate in churches, though they may not necessarily be believers. They just participate because they feel that's a good for sense of community, good for family, and so on. I think mostly, though, when people study apocryphal texts, we are. I think we do feel a bit like we're outside the faith because this material is not. We're not supposed to be reading it.
Heretical.
At all.
You're a heretic.
Yes, it's heretical. And the hallmark of our discipline is that we want to just understand these texts for what they say, and we're not demonizing the people who wrote them because we feel that they come to their project of writing this text from I think generally a good place. They're trying to understand their world. They're trying to deal with issues that are going on in their lives, and they're using New Testament characters in order to get these ideas across. So we're very, very sympathetic to the texts. And I think that tends to put us a little bit at variance with Christian institutions who would prefer that we don't read it at all. So I don't have that one person that can tell you, unfortunately.
And I would love, if you don't mind, whenever we edit this, we'll send it to you. If you could share it with your network, because I think what's super interesting, and I want to make sure that I don't get classified in this way and I don't hurt anybody's feelings. But like what I found is if you ask questions that they don't like or are willing to read things that you don't like, they won't exist in space with you. So I think the problem is right off of the rip, I can almost bet that most of, I shouldn't say this, how many people were excited for this, assuming you believed in God, and then when you didn't, it's like you don't have any value to bring them. And I find that to be incongruent with the very essence of the faith, right? Love people, see people, tolerate people, and it's one of the least tolerant. I shouldn't say it that way. In my experience, they won't even tolerate some of the questions I'm asking, right? So anyway, so all that to say, I think this conversation would be super meaningful with one of your peers that has come to study the same as you and find God for them. For me, I love it, man. I really love it. So what would your advice be, even though you're not supposed to give advice spiritually, or what would your experience be? And I hope it's okay. If you want to take this a different way, we can definitely talk about, I have more questions on the which text to prioritize, how we should be thinking about this. Definitely want to ask about the Council of Nicaea, like all the things you're an expert on. I want to talk about, but generally, because we can't move past go. Like how this is all about life philosophy and life approach. So walk me through the conviction and you sound like a very tolerant atheist. Like, don't be an asshole. I'm with you. I'm trying to be a tolerant Christian. I think it's easier to be a tolerant atheist than a tolerant Christian sometimes. I'm a little jaded, but tell me, if you don't mind, kind of just walking through the journey of I believed in this, like, and then I don't believe in this, and now I don't want to say it this way, Tony, but like, help me understand the atheist perspective of like a belief in nothing relative to a belief. Like, is that true? Is it when I say, Tony, do you believe in nothing? You're like, no, or are you like, yeah, no, I do. That is what I believe. And why is that beneficial to you, if you don't mind?
Believe in nothing. So the thing is, it's not that I'm staunchly against belief in a deity. It's just that I don't see any evidence for it. But I'm not closed to anything. I certainly aren't. I'm not arrogant enough to think that I know everything about how the world works and such. But it's just a matter of using. You get so used to using the scientific method that you can't help but do it in your daily life. If there's no evidence for something, then it's hard to come to a belief in it. But the process for me was a somewhat gradual one, and of again learning about other religions and the other texts, and seeing how religious belief is somewhat relative. People have their own particular beliefs coming from particular places and times in the world, and they are very convinced in them. But not all of them can be true. And most likely is none of them are true in the sense that they have it right. But it is they are all a universal attempt to try and understand the world. And I tend to think that as we have progressed as a people, that we've moved into science as our way to try and understand the world. And it hasn't completely given us all of our answers, but it's taken care of quite a few of them. And so I place my faith, you might say, in science and the scientific method of testing and trying to use evidence, use experiment to try and figure out how things work. And religious faith doesn't do that. Religious faith just tells you this is the way it is and you believe it or you don't believe it. But I prefer the other method. It's flexible. When we have new evidence, we can adjust our understanding, whereas religious faith is generally not flexible. But again, when it comes to the material I study, apocryphal texts, yes, some Christians may not like this literature because they've been told not to read it and may not like some of the ideas in it. But I would never tell people they should have to believe it, that they should think that the people who wrote the ideas in these texts are something that they should believe. Certainly not. But I think it's interesting to see how Christians over time have, again, used these characters, used these ideas to deal with their own particular situations. And some of this apocryphal information is actually very much part of mainstream Christianity, but people aren't aware of it. So stories of the saints, for example, in the Catholic tradition, they all come from apocryphal texts. Some elements of the Nativity in Eastern Christianity. So you see the iconography all over Eastern Orthodox Christian churches come from apocryphal texts. That's one of the things I like to get across in my work, that despite the church saying these texts should not be read, people did read them. People did use them, and they show up in art and drama and other venues, and people don't recognize that that's where they come from. So, back to you.
No, that's great. So I want to get back to, and I feel like you came to speak about Apocrypha, and now I came to speak about religion. So I want to stay in your lane. I think the one thing, and if we go on to be good friends, which I hope that we do, is I would love to iterate with you on, our ability to know things we can't know, and like
Mhm.
science's limitations, and then some of the things that I see as revealing of a higher power of some type. And it'd be fun for you to kind of color me back in the lines. But I think consciousness is the big thing. I would say until we have science around consciousness, I don't think we can understand the spiritual realm, and that's what gives me great hope. But so there you go. That's my pitch. I don't believe in converting people, but it would be fun for you and I to go back and forth. So let's talk about like. So how many? I know nothing about being. I like want to go teach business someday, but as a professor, what is it? How many classes do you teach, and which is your favorite class to teach? And then if you were to kind of be able to give the world some advice, like Tony Burke's like parting words. If you listen to nothing, listen to this. It's like, here's what you should know about like it could be something as simple as you better read it, or as simple as it's like be careful. I don't know what you would say, but like, yes, tell me about what you teach and what you'd want to teach the world. If we give you just, you've got the whole world's audience of the 10 people that follow my podcast.
My typical teaching, I teach a first year Bible course, so New Testament, Old Testament, and a New Testament course, because it's basically my training is New Testament. And then I've added courses that are reflective of my research interests. So I have a New Testament Apocrypha course and a Gnosticism course. So that's, some Apocrypha are Gnostic, some are not. And then I have a course called History of the Bible, which talks about not examining the individual biblical text, but examining the Bible as a book. So from canon formation to the present, where we have lots and lots of different translations. My favorite class, of course, is the Apocrypha one. But I do like the Gnosticism one as well, because again, it's a crossover material there. Because, the more that professors can bring in their own particular interests, the better I think it is for the students. They get a sense of the excitement of what we do, or that we have excitement about what we do. And when it comes to what I'd like people to know about Apocrypha, I would like people not to be scared of it. When the Da Vinci Code book and film came out some years ago, suddenly people who study Apocrypha matter in some way. People are asking us our opinions about it. And there's a bit of a cottage industry of books out there, some from more conservative writers, basically saying, this is the Apocrypha that's being discussed in the film, and you really shouldn't be reading it. And then some more liberal scholars who are saying, the film and the book get a lot of things wrong, but this is what we know about these texts and why they're of interest. So I would like that sense of, don't be scared of the contents of these texts, like they're going to change your religion, or your faith. And that's really what the conservatives are concerned about. And it's the same concern that people throughout history in the church have been concerned about, that if people read these other texts or think these other ways, discuss these other ideas, they're going to fall away from the faith. I think a faith that's open to multiple perspectives is a strong faith. And there's nothing wrong with a bit of malleability. And that's one thing that I think is wrong in a sense. That's a strong word. Well, with Catholicism, my own upbringing is that the Catholics, I went through Catholic grade school and high school. We had religion classes. Nobody ever talked about these texts. So when I encountered them in university, at first I felt a bit kind of pissed off that the church was not telling me about this stuff. And I think you're in a far better position if you tell people about it, but then give your perspective on it. And then people can therefore do what they will with the material. But to not talk about it at all, I think is a bad idea. So if I can, get that across to people about these are the texts that are out there, this is why they're important for the history of Christianity. This is why they're interesting for us as human beings to read this information. Then, I feel that I've accomplished my mission, one person at a time.
That's awesome. And I wanted to ask, what is it? And do you know any? And I'm sorry, you're gonna become my de facto scholar networker. I don't I know business people. I don't know anybody in your profession until today, like at a high level. Like, is there any do you get to cross pollinate with any psychology? Like the very nature of the tendency that you spoke to, and really what brought me here, and is I'm excited to talk to you about this it's like an autoimmune rejection. Like if that's different, or that might change my mind, or that might, like, then it must be bad, like
Okay.
Do you know what that calibration comes from? Like the human de facto, like Apocrypha, not canonized, can't be good, ignore. It's like, well, why wouldn't it be explore, and then decide? Do you know where that comes from? Like the human condition of that? And sorry if that's a weird question.
Yeah, it is a weird question for me, but I don't know if it's necessarily human as much as it is. I don't like individual human as much as it's an institution-based thing. People within institutions, religious institutions, in our case here, they want people to have a certain unified belief system. Everyone agrees on certain things, and they like to dictate to their followers what that is. And when there's information that comes from outside, there's a push against that. And this may make religious institutions sound a bit
it's okay.
evil, I suppose.
Yeah.
But this sense that they want to keep hold of their
Power.
Followers and their power.
Yep.
So it's not so much about trying to do good in the world as much as let's make sure we don't lose any of our people, and that those two things aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, because I think they do feel that they are saving people one person at a time. If they lose someone, then they've lost something, but they're also losing revenue, and they're losing the power that comes from numbers. Yeah, I don't know if people do have this natural reaction to shy away from things that they don't necessarily know, but certainly they're being told not to go to it. People do have a natural curiosity, right? So if there's two natures there, then they're certainly fighting against one another.
Yeah, you're getting into I'm a businessman. I'm not a philosopher, but one day I might be a philosopher, because I think curiosity is at the bedrock of all that's good for humans, and we squander it. I mean, we just cripple it, right?
Yeah.
Like we just everything. So what I heard you say is we've kind of I'm gonna paraphrase it. You can tell me if I'm speaking out of turn, but we've institutionalized and deleted curiosity in favor of subscription to ideology. It's somewhat to the tune of, like, so it's not innate in humans to be afraid of different, but we've kind of trained it. And if you subscribe to one of these fundamental faith traditions, and I think we could, the religion of politics could be the same thing, but would that be a fair categorization? I know I'm asking you to speak outside of your expertise a little bit, but like, am I summarizing what you said decent enough?
Yeah, I think so. But one thing about Christianity is it's a religion of belief, right? It's a religion that started within Judaism and quickly moved out of it. And Judaism has a certain amount of ritual, quite a lot of ritual. And Christianity decided to dispense with that. And it didn't want to it wasn't interested in Greco-Roman ritual either, which was the other option. So they had to figure out what they were, and what they were was based on belief. So they came up with creeds, which are these statements of belief. The most simple one would be Jesus Christ. So Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, whatever that means. And so belief becomes very, very important. Whereas Judaism, for example, is it kind of both Judaism and Greco-Roman religion was much more about practice, about doing things. And when it comes to belief in Judaism, I like to talk about this with my students. Rabbinic Judaism, if you read any rabbinic texts, when there's an issue to be decided, what you have is a list of various rabbis who are talking about an issue. So Rabbi Gamaliel says this, Rabbi Hillel says this, etc. And there's not often an adjudication at the end. It's a spectrum of ideas. And so we have a religion like Judaism where where concepts, ideas, there's a bit of a relaxed attitude to beliefs. Whereas Christianity, it's very rigid in belief. And I think that's part of the problem, you might say, about Christianity when it comes to these contrary views, these different ideas. And it's very much what the church was trying to stamp out, certainly in the early centuries. Do I think people do have a fear of the unknown? For sure. But I'm not sure that ideas contrary to their own are unknowns. As much as things that can be dangerous to their physical well-being. But again, this is not my field. I'm just I'm trying to respond to you as best I can.
Yeah, and I'm sorry. I don't want to pull you where you don't want to go. So it's interesting. I guess I guess getting back to it always goes to religion, right? And so the Gnosticism versus the Gnostic text versus the Apocrypha. Can you help me understand that to the layperson? I actually don't know. So what is tell me that.
We don't know exactly what the origins of Gnosticism are, but the fundamental idea is that this world is bad. And many people today may feel the same thing. There's a lot of chaos in the world. Therefore, the God of this world must also be bad. And the hope is that there's still salvation from it. So a Gnostic system, therefore, is a dualistic system. It has two gods. So Gnostic texts will often have a creation story, a creation of the cosmos story. So the cosmos starts off with one good universal being, unknowable, undescribable. And we can just call this, the good God. And he splinters off into various aspects for one reason or another. And one aspect of God, which is wisdom, creates something by herself. It's a female character. And this being that she creates, she doesn't want the rest of the aspects of God up there in the heavens to know about it. So she casts it out behind a veil of darkness. And this is the God of this world. And the God of this world, he vaguely remembers the heavenly realm where he's been cast out from. And he wants to create something like it in his domain. And so he creates the world and populates it with humans, etc. Now, wisdom and the other deities up in the heavens that are part of God don't want to abandon humans, because there's a spark of the heavenly realm inside humans. So these deities send down helpers, redeemer figures to humans to tell them about where their true origins are. And one of these figures is Jesus. So the Jesus of a Gnostic system is an agent of the heavens who comes down to earth to tell humans about their true origins. So this is the knowledge that gnosis means knowledge. This is the knowledge that Jesus imparts, that we don't belong in this world, and that we can be saved from it through certain ritual actions and go up into the heavens to be with the good God.
And so there's a series of texts that are Gnostic texts. Is the Bible a Gnostic text, or did I completely miss the point?
Nope. No. Bible is a monotheistic Christian text, so it still believes in. It connects. The New Testament is connected with the Old Testament, so that it's still the same God, Yahweh. Monotheistic system. There are angels, but there are no other gods. And Jesus is sent to earth by God as a sacrifice for humanity's sins, and so that we can all be redeemed and go to heaven at Judgment Day, generally. The Gnostic system is found only in texts that are not in the Bible, and there are quite a few of them. The largest discovery of these texts came from an Egyptian area close to a town called Nag Hammadi. So you might have heard of the Nag Hammadi Library. And this was a cache of around 50 or so texts that are, almost all of them are Gnostic. So someone probably in a nearby monastery put them in hidden them away, but maybe in a cemetery as grave goods. So these are texts that they valued, and they put them in their graves. But they all have this perspective of the Gnostic perspective. And we think monks in antiquity quite liked these texts, because one of the things that Gnostics did is they practiced asceticism. They didn't have sex, they didn't have family. And monks are ascetics. So these texts spoke to them in certain ways that biblical texts may not have. And yes, it had this kind of heretical or non-orthodox way of looking at how the world was created and Jesus' place in it. But I think they could figure out some way to reconcile this with the beliefs that they get from the New Testament texts. To us today, they seem quite at variance. But maybe to people in antiquity, they can do both things at the same time.
So now I feel like a stupid human. So when you were explaining Gnostic, I was looking up. I wanted to ask you about Dostoevsky, and I couldn't remember his name, and I didn't want to come across as a total idiot, and then I did. So Gnostic, as you were describing Gnostic, I heard you describing the biblical story, and so I either missed it or heard wrong. But what is the fundamental difference between the Gnostics? Because it sounded very much, I'm dumb. So hopefully it was because I was ADD and trying to look up an author, but potentially somebody listening is also dumb like me and needs this clarification.
Gnosticism is a dualistic system. So the God of this world is bad. The God of this world is bad.
Oh, okay. So that's.
There's another God, a good God up in the heavens, and he or his various aspects of himself, like Sophia, wisdom, want to save humans from this world. And so they send Jesus and others down to tell them about their true origins up in the heavens.
Got it. And so and I just want to make this. So when I heard you say there's God, world is bad, so God is bad. So there's a devil and a God. So where am I misapplying that as a Gnostic text?
It's not like some Gnostics would make that connection too. It's not so much that the God of this world is a bad God, but it is Satan is the God of this world. But it's not always described that way in the text. Often the God of this world has a particular name. Yaldabaoth is one, or Saklas, the kind of pejorative names. But yeah, you can equate it in a sense with a demonic figure. And and in that way, you're getting a bit closer to mainstream Christian thought that there is a counterpart to God that's evil, and some people might say that being, the devil, is more in control of this world than God is, because of all of the terrible things that are going on in it. But one thing about Christian Gnosticism is when it looks back at the Old Testament texts, it sees that God as the bad God. So you sometimes have these transformations of the creation story, because if God is bad, then what does that make the snake? So the snake is good. So you get these kind of flipping of all of your way that you read them, and it's really creative and interesting, because if you have a system in which knowledge is the thing that you want to acquire, yet you have a God in the creation story who's telling you to keep away of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, then that means Adam and Eve should have eaten from that tree. So it really upends the story and makes you read it in a quite different way.
I think we're still in Eden, and I'd love to talk about what that tree of knowledge was and all of those things, but that's not, you'll get me in trouble. So if you ever want to come back, we can totally talk about, I'd like to completely, the story has flipped on its head for me. And when you don't start with the belief that humans are inherently evil, everything, like you said, flattens out. Like the whole story flattens out. It becomes, and it's this, anyway, so I will digress. I will shut myself up because, but okay, so let's say, so there's 50 Gnostic texts, which is basically, and I'm going to try this and you're maybe going to get upset with me and say, does this guy listen? But some sort of dualistic good God versus bad God essence. Is that right? More or less is the big difference from the...
Yeah, you could say it that way.
I like to do I'm a big picture guy. I get lost in the details. So thank you for your tolerance of my anti-smartness. So then there's 50 Gnostic texts, and then you said hundreds of Apocrypha? Is that?
It's about 400,
Okay.
And that would include some of those Gnostic texts as well.
Yeah, and so there's some that overlap, and then so I think I find a lot of people are oh man, I'm gonna get in so much trouble with all my Christian friends, Tony. So thank you for coming. It's good. These are the conversations that need to happen. But I'm gonna say within the Christian, right, we've got 30% of people that are practicing Christianity. I don't know what the statistics are. I could ask Claude, but it's probably less than half of those people are going to church every Sunday, and I think less than half of those people are reading their Bible and or have read it front to back. And maybe that's unfair, but the real reason I say that is to say this: if anybody's listening, well, I don't want to say that. Very few people that are listening are going to get curious, study your lectures, and go read the Apocrypha themselves, right? So they're going to be like, all right, what do we need to know about the Apocrypha? So can you give us the TLDR moment, the cliff notes, if you will, just if you're not going to study it, or if you're only going to study these three, and this is most of what is revealed in there, or is that not even a fair request where it's there's just way too much? What is the... I guess what abbreviated, here's what you're missing, or here's what you should do, or here's what you should know, you being kind of a lifelong learner in this topic. What could we know? Yeah,
I could mention some categories of texts that and some that are particularly useful. Basically, well, in the New Testament, we have 4 types of literature. We have Gospels, so stories about Jesus, right? The Acts of the Apostles, so stories about the apostles. We have letters, people like Paul and John and James and Peter. And then we have an Apocalypse, the book of Revelation. Apocryphal literature covers all of those. So we have Gospels, which tell stories or give teachings of Jesus that are not found in the New Testament. We have apocryphal acts, usually of individual apostles. So where Thomas goes off to India and preaches. Paul in Asia Minor, Peter in Rome, etc. And we have apocryphal letters. There's even a letter by Jesus to a king named Abgar in Syria. And we have lots of apocryphal apocalypses: an Apocalypse of Thomas, an Apocalypse of John. That's the New Testament one. Apocalypse of Peter, Apocalypse of Paul, etc. So lots of these texts. Some of the key ones for each of those categories. For Gospels, there are two major infancy Gospels. One I mentioned already, the infancy Gospel of Thomas, with Jesus from the ages of 5 to 12. And the other one is the infancy Gospel of James, which really talks about Mary's life before she gives birth to Jesus. So her parents and how she met Joseph and things like that. The major adulthood story about Jesus that's not in the New Testament or adulthood text is the Gospel of Thomas. So not the infancy Gospel of Thomas, but the Gospel of Thomas. And this is a series of sayings by Jesus. There's usually numbered as 114 of them. And they don't have much in the way of narrative context. It's just Jesus said, Jesus said, Jesus said. And some of them are familiar because they are also found in New Testament Gospels, but some are brand new. They are not in there at all. And what's interesting about this text is some scholars think it's kind of a greatest hits of Jesus, written in the mid-2nd century. Some scholars think it might be earlier, and somewhere in the middle of the 1st century, maybe a little bit later. And therefore, that some of the sayings in there that are not found in the New Testament Gospels could be things that Jesus authentically said. And would add to our knowledge of what Jesus said and did. One thing also about this text, because it's only sayings, it doesn't have anything about Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. So we can extrapolate from this that maybe there were groups of Christians who didn't care about that, that the resurrection and crucifixion were not important. And that's certainly the case with Gnostic Christians. They don't believe in a resurrected Jesus. The Jesus that they believe in was this divine figure who came down to earth, operated around for a while, looked human, but wasn't human, and then just left. And so he can come back again and again to give new teachings if necessary. When I mentioned Apocryphal Acts as being individual acts of apostles, but we also have, as time goes on, every apostle in the 12 gets an account of their missionary teachings, and also these finish with martyrdoms. The church Catholic Church decided that they didn't much like the apocryphal Acts, but they did like the martyrdoms in them. So they are very much a part of Catholic teaching. So, for example, the notion that Peter was crucified upside down, that ultimately comes from the apocryphal Acts of Peter. I mentioned the letter of Jesus to Abgar, which is of interest. I won't say more about that, but I did mention about various apocalypses. Two of them, well, three of them, I should say, are tours of hell. So a figure like Peter would be brought to various places in hell and seen and shown people who had committed certain sins and how they were punished. And that has become part of our conception of hell today. Any depiction of hell where people going down there and they see various people being punished, that ultimately comes from these texts. And again, this is something I like to get across to people, that some of our traditions that we have today in our culture or in our religious culture ultimately go back to apocryphal texts. The parts that the Church, Catholic Church, has decided, or the Greek Orthodox Church has decided they will keep, but they'll dispense with other parts. Protestantism, of course, came along and dispensed with even those parts because they recognized that they weren't biblical. And if anything that is not biblical, Protestantism did not want to have. So I hope that gives a good sense of the types of texts that are out there. But one thing that I also want to reiterate or emphasize is these texts weren't written in just the first 3 centuries, and then they decided on what the canon was, and then everything else was intended to be destroyed. No, these things these people continue to write these over the centuries, and into the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries, people are writing apocryphal texts still. So it's something that's been with us throughout Christian history.
That was really great. I'm very excited for the tours of hell, and I didn't know about this infancy. This is informative to me. I'm very much enjoying the Gospel of Thomas, and so far it does seem like the greatest hits of Jesus. But so there's so many questions I wanted to give you. I guess let's talk about the moment, right? The Council of Nicaea, as you've come to study. Okay. So there's that, and then in case I forget, is just a really quick hitter. I did not read this anywhere other than when I read the book. I've read so much Bible, and that sounds arrogant, but I'm starting to read into what Jesus doesn't say, right? Or I think I am, or maybe that deems me a heretic. But I'm like, is there proof that Mary was his girlfriend? I feel like Mary Magdalene, Is there anything that suggests that?
There are some tantalizing things in the text. For one thing, why is she one of the women who goes to anoint his body? That's usually it's an intimate thing, right? It's a naked body. His mother goes, Mary Magdalene goes, and a few other women are named. But why Mary Magdalene of all the people? But there's not much else in the biblical text about that. Okay. But hold on, we can say more. Right, go ahead. Mary Magdalene tends to be maligned in Christian tradition as being a prostitute. That's also not in the biblical text. The only thing that is said about Mary Magdalene is that she had a bit of a demon problem. She was possessed by 7 demons, but she's also a woman of means. She's one of 3 women of means who support the Christian mission. And she's only secondarily considered a prostitute because of Christian theologians wanting to play with the idea of a good Virgin Mary and a bad slutty Mary, you could say. And it works well in sermons. Now, non-canonical texts play with the idea of Mary as more intimate with Jesus than we might expect. But the what they say is somewhat ambiguous. So, for example, we have a Gospel of Mary in which Peter says to Mary, he loved you more than us. Well, what does that mean? It doesn't mean he's necessarily a romantic thing, does it? Mm-hmm. And then we have a Gospel of Philip, which says that Mary was his partner, I guess is kind of the word, which can be translated as consort, but it can also just mean friend. So I guess it's ambiguous. And something like the Da Vinci Code book that I mentioned earlier really played with this and tried to make it that Mary Magdalene and Jesus were intimately connected, and they got married and they had children. But there's not enough in the biblical text to suggest that, and even the non-canonical texts are fairly ambiguous about that.
All right. We'll leave it as one of my heretical ideas that doesn't pass the sniff test. Okay, so then tell me about the council and how, I guess, because I took an intro in college. I took an intro to religious studies, and now basically my professor's summary, and I paid attention just enough to do well on the test, not enough to know anything, but his summary was everything. Everything is, I think, a story of heretics, right? One heretic after the other. And I think, generally you look around and we've got 300 denominations. I think he was right. But I'm gonna do my best version of this, and then you kind of clean it up for a professional. Sure. But so essentially, at some point after the New Way, Christianity had emerged. There's a sit down with all the clergymen or priests, or I'm not sure what the term is. They all sit down, and I think it was either at one council or they were spread out across a bunch of places. And the story that I've been fed is that they divinely all picked the same. They all came up with their independent lists. They walked into the room and these are the books that are going to be canonized. These are going to be the Bible. And I think those of us in Christianity are like, this is the infallible word of God. By God's hand, this book was formed. Anything else is heretical and bad. And if you question the text, shame on you. You won't burn up in hell, but we're going to have to pray for you if you're questioning the text too hard. So I've totally imparted way too much of my journey with that. But historically speaking, can you kind of give my listener, what is the council and how did we come with the canonized Bible? And maybe as fair as you can, a review of that. Is this,
Sure.
Yeah.
One thing I like to get across to my students is that the Bible didn't arrive fully formed at the foot of the cross when Jesus died. It took some time before people started writing, and then it took some time before those writings grew in esteem, in authority. And then it took time after that to kind of settle on what all Christians should read. Before Constantine in the 4th century, emperor, who allowed Christianity to be practiced freely, there's no central authority in Christianity. There's no one who could say what they could dictate to anyone what they read or what they believe. So things kind of grew kind of wild. So you had lots of texts being written. You had certain texts being valued more than other texts, but still lots and lots of texts. And so when Constantine came in to power, he was actually quite shocked at the amount of variety of thought in Christianity. And he wanted to use Christianity as a stabilizing force in the empire. So he needed to figure out some way to get kind of a universal, or Catholic means universal, set of beliefs. So he started these councils, and the councils were not actually there to tell people what text to read, but how to imagine Jesus was divine. How is he both God and human at the same time? And the councils are really focused on those issues. So the canon gets discussed, but not in the councils. So we have various writers who talk about the texts. So for example, one writer named Eusebius of Caesarea, writing around the same time as Constantine, mentions the texts that are valued by different people. And he also, in the process, mentions texts that are not valued. So we get this sense of where we are around the time of Eusebius, around the time of the Council of Nicaea. And basically, everyone agreed in the letters of Paul, everyone agreed on the Gospels and Acts, and some of the other letters. So, for example, everyone seemed to like 1 John, but there's a lot of people who weren't quite sure about 2nd and 3rd John. There were a lot of people who weren't sure about Revelation. So for another 40 years or so, there was still some debate about what you might call the fringes of the canon. Our first writer who lists all 27 books of the New Testament canon and no other is a writer named Anastasius. God, I'm not going to remember his name now. Anyway, some guy.
You could have made it up. You should have just said Paul. You could have said Paul Revere, and I would have said, okay.
Yeah. I want to say Anastasius, but something like that. I don't know why I'm blocking on it. Egyptian writer. who listed those texts and said, don't read any others. But people still read others. And we have some canon lists that come after his day, which talk about, maybe the Apocalypse of Peter should be included, and maybe a text called the Didache, and maybe a text called the Shepherd of Hermas. So there's still some discussion even after his day. And we even have some Bibles that have other texts in them. For example, there's Paul's letter to the Laodiceans, which is not in the Bible today, but we have hundreds of Bible manuscripts that do include it. We have Bibles in Syria and Armenia that have some different texts in it. The Ethiopic Bible has about 3 or 4 extra texts that are not found in the Western canon. So when I talk about canon today with students and people, I say we need to really qualify what we mean. Do we mean the 27-book canon that's largely accepted today? Do we mean the Ethiopian canon, which is slightly different? Do we mean the canon of the Syrian church in the 5th century, which had a few different texts? So canon has had some variations over time. And you have to imagine that everyone who has a different canon will have certain variations in their belief as well. So imagine a Christianity that doesn't have the Book of Revelation. That's going to be a different type of Christianity, I think. And we do have Christianities that didn't have that. We have Christianities today that focus very much on the Book of Revelation. So the Seventh-day Adventists or the Jehovah's Witnesses, that's a very, very important text for them. Most other Christian denominations don't think about it all that much. So these councils, Council of Nicaea, is certainly part of the process of determining correct belief, but they didn't really so much talk about canon. That was kind of a side project of other people to decide. And we do have some records of the decisions that they made and the variations. And so it may be surprising that, again, it took about 300 years after Jesus' death to really figure out what text should be authoritative.
And so, again, you give us so many details, and then I missed the big picture. So Council of Nicaea was to outline what to believe. Is that what you're saying? Did you say that? But that Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, when it comes to Christology, councils are all about Christology. And Christology means how exactly is Jesus divine? Is he coexistent with the Father? Is he with the God? Is he of the same substance? These are finer, nuanced things. Like when you think about Orthodox Christianity versus Gnostic Christianity, the Jesus of those are very, very different from one another. The types of Jesus discussed at these councils, and there were numerous councils, and Nicaea was just the first one, are much more subtle differences. And it seems surprising that they fussed over so much, but they did. And it would cause people to be excommunicated or even executed as a result of their variations, but the variations were quite small.
So people are getting whacked while they're trying to figure out what to believe back then still?
And it's a complicated thing. You read the Bible, the biblical text, and the Bible never actually says exactly how God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit relate to one another.
I know. That's why I get so frustrated with people that think they know what's going on.
Yeah, and I think, I'm not sure that the people who wrote those texts exactly knew themselves. And so it was left to others to figure out. And so that's why you have these councils to try and figure out the nuances. And it doesn't help that the Gospels, for example, don't agree with one another, and or aspects of thoughts of Paul are not reflected in the Gospels, etc. But once you put all these things together in the covers of one book, they start to interpret one another, or are used to interpret one another, and the contradictions start to become a problem. And so you need these councils to figure out these issues that are not resolved in the biblical texts.
How do you see? This is I keep wanting to trip into outside of your lane, like spiritual, it's flagrant to me. Pauline gospel versus Jesus gospel, like it's flagrantly different. How do you think it comes to be that people can, like, if I were to litigate this with many people, they'd be like, what are you talking about? They're exactly, like, what is, like, do you have any, I suppose I really need to get a psychologist in here, but do you have any, like, because you've read it and you've read it from a very unbiased, like, you're not very rigid and, like, what is, like, is it could it be said, I guess I'll say it this way. Can you read any text the way you want to read it? Is that just really the truth? Like, if I come to a passage looking for a meaning, I feel that I can extract the meaning I want somehow. Is that like, anyway, I guess, do you have any thoughts on
You
that?
can. You can do that with, you can read a poem and do that too, right? It's all about reader response and what do you get out of that? What we emphasize in biblical studies is to read something in its context. What would the understanding of it be to a reader of the time? And that gets us to the historical details of a text, but that we also acknowledge the fact that it gets read different ways by different people over time. And that affects history, that affects doctrine, and so on. But biblical studies is fundamentally about, it's a historical enterprise about reading it in its original context. And I think there you can get something close to accuracy as much as possible, because our knowledge of the ancient world is fragmentary, right? We only know so much, but we try to understand it in its time period. So when Paul talks, for example, about women being veiled in Corinth, what does he mean by that? Why is he insisting on this? What was the practice of veiling like in Greek Corinth? So it's about nitty-gritty historical details of time and place. So I think that gets us close to understanding meaning, the proper meaning of the texts, in that this is what Paul intended, this is what his readers would understand. I think that's the important thing. Are there differences between what Paul says and versus the Gospels? For sure. I think it's interesting that, Paul is this Johnny-come-lately to the movement. He never met Jesus, never claims to have met Jesus, not while Jesus was alive. Anyway, yeah. He claims to have had a revelation. And he seemed to not get along with the apostles. He seemed to disagree with them on certain fundamental matters. So why do we follow Paul so much? And it's because Paul made Christianity palatable to non-Jews, to Gentiles. And as Christianity developed, more Gentiles became Christians and Jews became Christians. And so it naturally went in that direction. But I'm not so sure Peter, who is Jesus' second in command, would agree with the Christianity that we practice now. I think Peter would, as a follower of Jesus who is Jewish, would still would follow the law and would expect Christians to follow the law. That's not what Paul wanted, and that's not the type of Christianity that endured.
I always get that backwards. I always thought, I remember the Paul versus Peter schism, but I thought Paul was for the Jew. So Paul was for the Gentile, Peter was for the Jew. Very interesting. Gosh, man. So then I guess, and I think you do a really good job of politicking and being very neutral, and it's hard. It makes it very hard for me to get, where I want. It's very respectable. I think you have to do that in your profession. I suppose, like, without assaulting anybody's faith, but just as a sincere, objective, like, historical review, like the legitimacy of the Bible relative to the Apocrypha. Obviously, you've enjoyed the Apocrypha, but, like, I guess let's operate as a litigator. So there's those of us. I'm going to put myself in these camps. I think the Bible is amazing. I do. I think, and I've slowly fallen to the middle where I'm like, well, it's not infallible, but it's amazing. But let's say that there's the camp of, this is the perfect, infallible Word of God. This is God breathed and this is divine, and He wanted us to have it. And then let's go to the left side of this that says this was a control people device, right? This was this is how the government's going to leverage religion in order to control people, control thought, and tax them and cripple them and, like, manipulate them. And I think to be in this far leaning left camp here, or not left, but it's on the left side of my on this side of the spectrum, it's conditional that we understand evil intent. And on the other side, we're assuming, like, really well intended, like this is the best for all people, and we, like, God is great and God did this for the best of mankind. On the left side, it's like we want to weaponize this to leverage, like, to wage a resource war against people. You follow what I'm saying? Like, and I'm sure where do we fall in that camp? And like, I'm sure it's always going to be in that middle threshold, but where would you be? Where would you feel most opinionated? Like whether it's the merits of it or was it an accident or like, I'm not talking about the Council of Nicaea. I'm talking about the actual canonization of our living word, whatever that. And maybe it might be beneficial for you to take me through. You took me through the councils. What actually went into getting this thing canonized that I don't know? Sure.
We can read from people like Eusebius what criteria they used. I'll have to remember these off the top of my head, but it has to be by an apostle, right? Or, someone intimate with Jesus. But then, even apocryphal texts say that. So that can't be the only criterion. But it has to have the antiquity, right? It has to be by one of the apostles. So it has to be old. It has to be known by early church fathers, which guarantees that it has antiquity. So people like Justin Martyr in the 2nd century, if he mentions it, then that helps to authenticate it. It has to agree with the rule of faith, which is a circular argument because it's the text that determined the rule of faith in the first place. But let's say you believe in these 4 gospels, and then you look at another one and say, that doesn't seem to agree with the 4 that I like, therefore that one's not going to be accepted. So you build this kind of a canon of faith based on the text you like, and then you compare the text that you're not sure of with those ones. And I think the major one is use. Like these texts were popular. These texts were used by people. They became authoritative in their acceptance by people. But the one thing about it is that forms a problem because you don't have one gospel that becomes an authority. You have 4, and there are different ways that you can deal with that. And one way that one writer, a writer named Tatian in the 2nd century, dealt with it is he combined them all into one text. He produced what's called a harmony, and his harmony was popular in certain places, but eventually kind of fell out of use. But you can get a sense that maybe having 4 gospels with differing contents could be a bit of a problem for Christians. But nevertheless, they were widely accepted, and so that they became canonical. And that's one of the things that I think we stress in the study of this material is that there were very pragmatic reasons for why people chose these texts. And one of the pragmatic reasons is that, they were widely popular. People liked them. People used them. But another practical reason is, let's getting back to the Gnostics issue. If a church that follows Gnostic ways of thinking is not going to last very long, because as I said, Gnostics were ascetics. You're not going to get new Christians if no one's having sex. So you have to value the texts, the beliefs that will keep the movement going. So the church is going to pick the texts that are not going to value asceticism or not expect asceticism for everybody. You can expect it for some, priests, bishops, etc., but not everybody, or you're not going to have a movement anymore. As I said, Gnostics thought the world was evil, so they don't want to keep it going. So they're not going. So that's one of the reasons why they didn't have children. They want to kind of rewind creation by not having any children. So what we do, and again in our discipline, we try to look at the human reasons why texts were selected, rather than expect them to be divine reasons. And we see the human in the operation by when people like Eusebius tell us why they picked chose the text that they did, or when people sometimes add texts that other people don't. If God is directing the canon, why didn't he make it the same for everybody? If God is directing the canon, why didn't he make sure that every manuscript was copied exactly the same? He certainly left a lot of things for chance.
There's so much I want to ask you that I feel like a broken record, and we're going to come up on time, and I actually have a hard stop today. So I think there's 3. I'll just to give you 3 closers.
Sure.
One would be, is there anything we didn't talk about that you wish I'd asked for? 2 would be, what do you hope for, or what do you strive for, or what keeps you excited every day? And then the third would be like, what do you find unanswered for you? Like that's like, I can't answer this, or in my studies, I wish I could answer this. Like what is yet to be discovered as you look through the world?
Oh my. What was the first question?
Just anything you wish I would have asked about that I didn't.
Not really. I think I got a lot in there. I do want to just repeat the just as a bit of a sales pitch.
Please.
The eClavis, again, it's a free access site for everybody. It's not meant to be just for scholars. This is not an ivory tower thing. Our website is nascal.com, not nascar.com. That's something else. And the resources there for people to use and just read about these texts and get introduced to them.
Let me before are you moving on from that, or is there more?
No, still working on it. Okay. Not every text is finished.
No, I just meant.
Oh, sorry, that topic.
Yeah, no, well, and it's big for me that you came, and I'm a business guy, so you said it's free. NASCAR.com. Help me understand, because I've always felt it to be a bummer that like education doesn't get more resources, but let's be honest, it doesn't.
Right.
It's very hard to. So is there advertising, or how does it? So NASCAR.com. How does it work for you, or this is just a passion project?
Passion project. It's an outreach project in a sense. The sense of trying to get scholarship out to everyday people as well as other scholars, and so we have minimal costs to operate this thing. Basically, I do most of the work, and my salary helps to pay for that. But yeah, there's no advertisement. There's no advertising, no user fees, nothing. And a lot of scholars today are into open access. We like people to be able to get information as easily and cheaply as possible. Second question.
Sorry, I'm going to stay on your stuff. It's okay. My questions can wait. You can email me or something if we don't get to them. I really want to I want to make sure that this is life-giving for you. So take me on a user journey of this. I'm sure you said it, but like, who should go? Is this me? I'm Bible curious, me, or who is it that you're trying to reach there?
Yeah, for sure, Bible curious. And NASCAL does a few other things as well. We have a translation series of books, and we have some meetings. The New Testament, the more New Testament Apocrypha series is kind of connected with it in a sense. The same scholars are operating. So our goal is really just to try and get information out about apocryphal text to other scholars and to the wider public. Again, not trying to convert anyone in any way to our thinking, but just to educate and make people aware of the material. And one thing I liked about that in particular, and I've said this a few times, is to get people to recognize that that the content of these texts are still around us, in churches, in movies, in television, and books, and so on. And so the more you know about the proper contents of these texts and their original contexts, the better, because you won't pick up a book like, say, the Da Vinci Code and learn stuff in there that is not actually accurate. It takes us, it introduces people to apocryphal texts, but it doesn't do it from a scholarly perspective. So we like to get the scholarship out there, and so people are aware of the texts and what their true contents are and what the scholarly discussions about those texts are.
Tony Burke is a prominent Australian politician and a member of the Australian.
That's not me.
Yeah, I know. So give me the link, and I'm going to put it in for the producers because I couldn't find it. It's just NASCAL, NASSCAL.com. NASSCAL.com. Okay. So just so you know, I went NASCOW like a doofus.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. All right. My pronunciation.
So we got it. We'll do, everybody's invited. We'll make sure to hyperlink it whenever this gets posted.
Thanks.
So cool.
And I hope it's not true that your listeners would tune out as soon as they heard I was an atheist. My religious beliefs don't affect my work, and it shouldn't make people not want to, just take a trip through this material. Again, I'm not so sure it really can threaten your faith unless you've been told not to read it in the first place. Because, no one says you have to believe any of it. It's just ideas, and you can accept or reject them at will. But I don't think ideas shouldn't be that dangerous.
Well, I so echo what you're saying, and I do think it's an unfortunate truth. And I think, maybe I'm being too judgmental. I've just found a lot of doors slam in my face when I ask questions. I think it's unfortunate, and I maybe I'm a little hypersensitive to it. But I will say that I think if they didn't listen to this one, well, we'll see. I'm working on it. I think the people that are behind me are going to be more tolerant than I think. So, yeah, cool. Well, let me pick one of the ones I asked to talk about, and then we can skip the other one, and maybe we'll email or we'll bring you back on. But what do you hope for, or what do you find unanswered? Pick one of them.
Unanswered. That's tricky. We talked about a little. I was going to say, when we talked about how much you value the Bible, and when you might want to try and pit the Bible against the non-canonical text, which I wouldn't necessarily do. Where does it come up? I think that there's so much about the ancient world that we don't know, and even the Bible, I'm somewhat skeptical about how well it reports the actual historical events that it tells us about. How well it actually tells us about the historical Jesus, because even in the biblical texts, I think there's interpretation going on there by the authors. So I think who Jesus was is incredibly mysterious. I don't know. I don't think apocryphal texts get us anywhere closer, but I don't think the biblical texts get us as close as we would like either. They are the earliest texts, which help, when looking at things from a historian's perspective, the earlier the better. And I think the New Testament Gospels are probably the earliest texts we have about Jesus. I'm just not sure they are dispassionate about who Jesus is. I think they have certain ideas they want to get across that may not be connected to actual history, and that's a bit of a problem. So people who do historical Jesus research, God bless them, or someone bless them, because it's hard work, and you have to apply certain methodology to get through the layers of interpretation in these texts, and people feel that they have gotten there. But so many people have gotten there that we have lots and lots of historical Jesuses in scholarship. And the fact that there's so many shows us that there's such ambiguity still about who he is, even from having all of this material out there about him. So I don't think that'll ever be solved. But one thing in my discipline, which is somewhat heartening, is that we often have these new discoveries of text. So there's always stuff for me to do, for my people to do, that's new and exciting. We're not always going back to the same well. We're not always trying to figure out Mark or figure out John. We'll suddenly have a Gospel of Judas to play with, or a Gospel of, Nicodemus, or anyone else you can mention that give us something new to do. It doesn't necessarily get us back to Jesus or the first century, but it tells us something about Christians at some point, and what they were thinking.
I love the test. I just think we should always be expansive in our learning. But I just realized, and we're just going to have to do the intros, outros later for the producer. I didn't ask you the most important question to all of this. So how do you come to understand the nature of Jesus? Like, how have you, from a historical perspective, like I presume you can't deny that he walked the earth. Do you think that, I read the text as I don't see him ever trying to be claiming a deityship, worship. Mm-hmm. I think he does say follow, which I believe means live like I have lived, not worship me as a God. So I'm just curious, how do you paint that box? Like, resurrection was made up. Resurrection was a spiritual thing. We don't know. How do you come to understand the nature? I cannot believe I didn't leave with this class. I guess I'm not very good at this, Tony. We're going to have to find a new facilitator. But what do you think?
Well, again, objective, historical, critical, scientific method study, way of studying things. Jesus was not divine. We start there. He was a human being. He was living in a time of some turmoil where there were expectations that maybe someone would come along and change the fate of Jews in what we can call Israel, but it goes by different names, different times. And he was one of these people who stepped forward, and people said, "Hey, this guy might be the one. This might be the one who changes things." He did not seem to come across as a rebellious kind of a figure, like a military type of Messiah. He seemed to be more of a teacher. He taught people about things related to compassion, about healing, about treating people well, which is always nice. He probably was an exorcist and a healer. What does that mean necessarily? Does it mean he had powers? Probably not, but there's power of suggestion. If you feel that God can work through people to affect healing, then those people who have some kind of a physical problem can get better. We know that scientifically. But that his reputation was as a healer and exorcist and a teacher. He was killed by Rome. The charge was that he was king of the Jews. Did he say that? Did his followers say that? We don't know. But like other would-be messiahs or prophets or apocalyptic figures, he was executed. But for some reason, Christians claim that he rose from the grave. What did that mean exactly? Well, Paul seemed to think of it as more of a ghostly rising, but the Gospels say it's in the flesh. And then he ascended up into heaven. Why did they say that? I'm not exactly sure. I think there's a sense that the Christian movement continued despite his death. But, could those stories be purely symbolic? Or were they completely made up? Or were they misunderstandings? I don't really know, but I think the message that people were trying to get across is that Jesus is part of this resurrection that comes with the end of times. And early Christians were very apocalyptic. They thought the end was coming and that Jesus would return very, very soon, and that all the faithful would rise up into the heavens with him. That way of thinking didn't last very long, and so that kind of peters out of the thinking of the church for the most part. But that was the early thinking. So, sorry, a lot of stuff off the top of my head there. So I hope you got something out of that.
Yeah, no, it's great. I think what I was trying to do is not take you down what does Tony believe about God, because I think that's compromising for you. So my ask would be, well, my first thing is thank you for coming. Thank you for being on. I would love to, I'd say we're at the early stage of this. We don't have like a massive following or anything like that, but I will be putting out your NASCAR stuff, and maybe some of the studies I lead will be jumping on there, because we're always looking for education and support you that way. When this posts, we'll send it to you. I would love it if you could just be on the lookout for anybody that's like the psychology of religion. If there's I don't know where I look for somebody to talk to about that. I would really, really love to talk to somebody that's not shy and is a pro-faith professor of your kind of dominion. And then if you know anybody, and they don't need to be a scholar, but I have had a very hard time getting somebody with the atheist view to come on here.
Really? I think they were.
I know. Do you know the Friendly Atheist? The Friendly Atheist?
I think so.
He freaking he snubbed me. I was like, hey man, I just love to I want to understand. He's like, no, those are like lifeless to me. Like, good luck. And I was like, dang. Thanks for responding. So anyway, if you know anybody, I just want to say this, and this is for my audience too. Like, I have found if we can take every religion and remove the intolerance, we can end religious wars, right? Like if every religion stayed the same, but it was tolerant, it would be a beautiful thing. And I want to try to, and I'm stupid. I believe that bridge could be built. But
that's hopeful.
Yeah.
Not stupid, just hopeful.
Yeah, it's hopeful. But we're going to keep having conversations and try to make that happen. So with that, man, thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
And yeah, if you ever want to come back, the platform is yours. That's why I built it. We won't get into any more philosophy from Kevin, but the platform, it's here. If you or any of your colleagues ever want to come talk about things, if it's interesting to me, I think it's worth bringing up.
How long have you been doing this?
Having conversations my whole life.
No, just
the podcast.
How long has the podcast been going?
We started it, and so I did it all. It'll take me too long to explain, but I find advertisement growth, I find subscription to people thinking growth, and I find self-promotion growth. So like we've got 2 shows. One is construction, which is what I'm good at, and then 2 is kind of my faith, curiosity, and passion exploration. So we've got over 100 recorded. I just I don't know.
Wow.
I don't have my social media dialed in yet, so I've been like slow to promote. And I, for me, it's just a conversation. I enjoy conversation. So like this is life-giving to me. It's so fun to be able to talk to an expert in this. I couldn't have just asked you for a phone call. That would be weird. It's like, hey, Tony, you never met me. Let's talk. So, so yeah. And I look forward to I think like life is kind of an evolution of discussions. And, so yeah, I think I really appreciate that you were willing to give the time, and
you're welcome.
If whatever I can do to drive people to NASCAR, that's what we're gonna do. Great conversation with Tony Burke. He's too smart for me. I couldn't focus in on the details, so probably not my best work, but what a wealth of knowledge. For those that are Bible curious, you should just read it. Forget what the church says. Forget what religion says. Just check out the Bible. Check out Jesus. He's super cool. For those of you that are well read in the Bible and want to take it to the next level, like we're reading the Gospel of Thomas. It is like super cool. We're doing the study version by Jacob Needleman. I would 10 out of 10 recommend. I think in some circles that gets me outcasted as a heretic. In many that gets me deemed expansive. So we try to stay expansive. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. Thanks, Pineapple, for the production, and we'll see you guys back next time.